The United Nations might be one of the most optimistic, ambitious projects, well, ever. The idea of taking all the countries of the world, putting them in a room and saying, now kiss and make up, to stop war forever, was quite a decent idea. I mean, that's how they intended it anyway. In reality, however, the UN has struggled to live up to the utopian ideals it was set up to fulfill. Though it would be unfair to not credit the UN for settling many international disputes in a boardroom instead of a battlefield. In its own way, however, the UN became one of the battlefields of the Cold War. Many of us think of the Cold War as nuclear politics and proxy wars. Still, the USSR, USA, and their allies fought their ideological struggle in the hallowed halls of the United Nations as well. So what we're going to cover today is the landscape of that battlefield. How was the UN structured? I'm your host David, and this is the Cold War. So, since the UN refers to these 6 bodies as organs, I guess this counts as a bit of an anatomy lesson for you all. Let's begin with the General Assembly. It's the only organ of the UN where every country has a seat, and that seat is equal to every other country. So this is the one place where, say, the developing world has a big say over things. As we'll see later in this channel when we're talking about the Third World or non-aligned movement, this is where they'd be able to make their stand in international politics. This is the body whose headquarters is in downtown New York and typically meets near the end of every year. It's here where the UN adds or kicks out members, as well as votes on resolutions. The United Nations Secretariat is the executive function of the UN. Its job is a little vague, however. Roughly, the Secretariat is the agenda setter for the UN, trying to introduce new initiatives and push the UN dialogue forward. Very often, it's also the outward-looking part of the UN, which publishes all the treaties and does much of the UN's interaction with the press. A lot of UN researchers and policy advisors work for this office as well, making it sort of the bureaucratic organ of the UN body. It's also headed by the UN Secretary General, who's typically thought of as the highest administrator in the organization. If there was a president of the world, this could be considered that role, though their job is nowhere near as powerful as the title might imply. The Secretary General oversees peacekeeping operations and various executive works, such as implementing the will of groups like the Security Council. You know what? Speaking of the Security Council, let's talk about the Security Council. This was the body meant to manage the issues of international war and peace. The council is made up of 15 states, but contains 5 permanent members. Dominant countries in the post-war world act as the policemen of the world in perpetuity. Their words, not ours. The thing about the Security Council is that those permanent member states can veto any UN resolution, as the Security Council contained both the United States and the Soviet Union. You can imagine that created a fair amount of gridlock at the UN. So much so that out of any other factor, this was likely the most significant contributor to the UN not living up to its idealistic founding. The permanent members of the Security Council at the time the UN was founded were the USSR, USA, United Kingdom, France, and the Republic of China. In our Korean War series, you might remember that the intervention in the Korean Peninsula went through as a UN mission because the USSR was boycotting the Security Council for not accepting the communist People's Republic of China as a member instead of the Republic of China, Taiwan. The other 10 seats are elected for 2-year terms. Because the US and USSR were both members, it did mean that for the most part, the UN was unable to intervene in many conflicts associated with the Cold War. The next organ on our tour is the Economic and Social Council, or ECOSOC, also headquartered in New York. Its domains are the various aid and social organizations, as well as discussing matters of social justice, civil rights, and economics on an international stage. Under ECOSOC administration are groups like the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, which sets out to uphold the tenets of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, established at the UN's founding. Something you can hear a little bit about in our previous video on the UN. But besides this flagship operation, commissions have been made to deal with international drug smuggling and crime. They've worked to coordinate scientific endeavors and collect data for statistical research on a global level. They manage development, women's rights, and even global environmental protections. A lot of very noble work which continues to this day. Now, over at The Hague in the Netherlands is the judicial branch of the UN, the International Court of Justice. Here, states can try to work out legal disputes before an international court. This organization is actually older than the UN, being a continuation of an international court set up as part of the League of Nations after the First World War. Though powerful, it still has problematic limits. States must agree to the ruling of the court before the trial, which limits what cases the ICJ ends up adjudicating. On top of that, rulings then go before the Security Council, so a permanent member can just veto any judgment put before them. Remember what I told you about the Security Council causing gridlock? But if you ever hear about a war criminal being taken to The Hague, this body is where they're going. The sixth organ, which makes the United Nations function, is the Trusteeship Council, or at least it was. Since 1994, it actually no longer has a reason to exist. To explain this, we'll need to get into the League of Nations and the First World War a little bit. After the Great War, several empires had collapsed, such as Austria-Hungary and the Ottomans. The territory of those empires, as well as several other regions, were deemed ready for independence. Still, the League of Nations established after the war did not feel them prepared for self-government. They built what was called the mandate system to give powerful states territory they needed to get ready for self-governance. Well, after the Second World War, the League of Nations was disbanded, and the trusteeship took up managing the mandates, now called trust territories. So think of it as a decolonization bureaucracy. It was active all through the Cold War, only dissolving when Palau became the last trust territory to become independent in 1994. Though inactive, it's been proposed to restore it to manage and protect global common resources, such as the atmosphere, oceans, Antarctica, the internet, and even outer space, as that becomes more relevant. At the founding of the UN, there were also some funds and programs which didn't fall under the direct jurisdiction of a particular organ. Only a few were born in the early UN, but this has since exploded into several crucial world organizations which manage many international systems. One example would be the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. There was a massive refugee crisis after the Second World War, and the UN needed a body to replace the International Refugee Organization. This is the organization which ensures the rights of refugees who don't have a state to stand up for their protection. It tries to find locations for refugees to live and make sure they get to their new homes safely. More than several times during the Cold War, conflict did as it always does and created millions of displaced people who then needed homes. The UNHCR worked on that specific goal with a sister organization, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, or UNRWA, specifically for the massive numbers of displaced Palestinian refugees, many of which still live in refugee camps to this day, a full generation on. If you've ever seen one of these boxes on Halloween, or an older FC Barcelona kit, you're also likely familiar with the UN Children's Fund, or UNICEF. This fund is specifically for the development and humanitarian aid for children around the world. Which, I have no complaints about. An international body that looks explicitly out for kids who have no real political representation seems like a good idea. Of course, there are several more you're likely familiar with today. Still, they were established later and will come up as this channel moves forward in time. The UN also administers a small military role called peacekeepers. Made up of soldiers from various member states, the peacekeepers are meant to go into disputed areas, by invitation and with UN authorization, to make sure peace agreements are enforced, and to try and act as a middle agent to settle conflicts, or at least to try to prevent mass violence. Frequently, UN peacekeepers would be in regions where the US and/or the USSR had ushered proxy wars to create the violence in the first place. As we go through these international organs and organizations, we can get a new appreciation for the role the UN plays in trying to maintain global stability. Often maligned, these organizations represent a truly unique operation, a project with the whole world working on some of the world's most significant issues. To what degree they succeed is up for debate and discussion, but it's still a noble project. As we go forward, we will refer to these UN bodies when talking about international politics. So now you have a better idea of what they all are, and the wonder of YouTube is that you can always come back and watch again. But do it from a different account and a new IP. Unique watch time is important to making this channel grow. We hope you've enjoyed today's topic, and to make sure you don't miss future episodes, please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. We're also active on Facebook and Instagram at The Cold War TV. If you enjoy our work, consider supporting us via www.patreon.com/thecoldwar. This is The Cold War Channel, and don't forget, the trouble with the Cold War is that it doesn't take too long before it becomes heated.